2 days ago, Brett Baty woke up as the starting third baseman for the New York Mets. Now, he's in limbo.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to talk about Brett Baty, the guy that was most impacted by Bo Bichette signing with the Mets. What happens now with Baty? In the first segment, I'll talk about his road up to this point and why he deserves to be an everyday player for some team in 2026. We'll make the case for why that should still be with the Mets and maybe a super utility role, or as their starting first baseman, or maybe their starting left fielder. Then we will go into the case to trade Brett Baty and which teams make sense as landing spots and which targets should the Mets be looking at if they do decide to move Baty. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief and where I wrote the article that is mirroring today's podcast, which is Brett Baty just became the most interesting player on the New York Mets, which I will leave linked in the episode description if you'd like to read it. And what I talk about in the piece at first is the lead up to where we're at now, which is Brett Baty and this flirtation that he's had with the title third baseman of the future for the New York Mets. When he was drafted in the first round back in 2019, we thought, oh, that could be the future third baseman of the New York Mets. When he rised up prospect rankings to become a consensus top 100 prospect in baseball and to be ranked as high as a top 20 prospect in baseball by some outlets at Just Baseball, we had Brett Baty going into the 2023 season at number 19, one of the very best prospects in the game. When he took the keys from Eduardo Escobar in 2023, we thought he'd be driving the Ferrari for a long time at the hot corner. Did not end up that way. 2023, a rough season for Brett Baty. 2024, again, it was Baty's job. He won it with a strong spring training. Had a decent start. I remember at one point, a couple weeks into the season, Brett Baty was rocking a batting average over 300, but he faded, and then the door got cracked open for Mark Vientos, and Vientos just barged through that door and took the third base job from Brett Baty, put together the best season the Mets have had by a third baseman in terms of WAR since David Wright, and obviously had their remarkable playoff run. So in 2025, who was the opening day third baseman for the New York Mets? It was Mark Vientos. He had earned that job. But Vientos stumbled, struggled both offensively and defensively. That cracked open the door for Baty, who was already forcing some playing time over at second base. And he ends up filling this utility role, bouncing back and forth between third and second. He was a stellar defender at third. He held his own surprisingly well at second base, a new position for him that he picked up when he was just in AAA at the end of 2024 and then throughout spring training in 25. All of a sudden, he's a passable second baseman and a really good third baseman, and the bat went up and down, but finished really strong. He had a great month of May in the middle. He had March and April, slow start to the season. May, again, he was awesome. June, struggled. July, struggled. August, through the end of the season, Brett Baty finished really strong. He hit 308, 370 on base, 496 slug. Quick math that says that is an 866 OPS for Baty. Had 7 home runs, had a 146 WRC plus across 43 games played in the final 2 months. And that was an issue for the Mets. They played 53 games and Baty only got in 43 of them. And that was a problem. The guy was playing that well. He probably should have been in the lineup more, probably should not have had to give up as much playing time as he did to Mark Vientos in particular, but the occasional Ronnie Mauricio start. And for Baty, I think he showed down the stretch why he deserved to be a starting player in the next upcoming season. He finished the year with a 111 WRC plus overall, so that grades out as an above average hitter. And he had 18 home runs, which was a career high. So you could envision Brett Baty coming into this season as the Mets starting third baseman, giving them great defense every day, part of that run prevention, and possibly with more playing time, clearing 20 home runs and being a nice threat there in the middle of the Mets lineup. Because of what the Mets were projecting, that is what we heard all offseason. David Stearns had two players that he was out in front on all year long, pumping them up, breathing confidence into them. And that was Carson Bench saying that the Mets top prospect would have a chance to break camp on opening day. And that Brett Baty had the keys to third base, that he had earned more playing time, that he had earned the right to be the Mets third baseman going into the 2026 season. And then you signed Bo Bichette, which was a signing that none of us saw coming, a signing that didn't make sense when you were sort of looking at the landscape of potential fits for the Mets because they had Baty. Why they need to go get Bo Bichette? Well, they need to get Bo Bichette because Bo Bichette is a huge bat for this team that can bat third behind Juan Soto. And, we talked on yesterday's show about the success Bo Bichette has had with runners in scoring position, where last year he hit 381 with a 189 WRC plus, and you understand why the Mets signed Bo Bichette. They needed a big bat. But what does that mean for Brett Baty? Because the quick reaction, I think, for a lot of us, myself included, was, okay, does that mean Brett Baty gets traded? But you also have to remember that there's a lot of positions on the field, and Brett Baty showcased an ability to be versatile last year. So you look at the Mets roster. Okay, you got an everyday third baseman in Bo Bichette. You got an everyday shortstop in Francisco Lindor. You got an everyday second baseman in Marcus Semien. First base, you got Polanco. Is he an everyday player? I mean, you probably want him in the lineup most days, but is he going to be an everyday first baseman? Or do they want to spare him some time at DH? Where's Mark Vientos factor in? And now there's Brett Baty in that mix. Brett Baty, if you were trying to form the best defensive infield for the New York Mets, for my money, I would bet on Brett Baty to come out of camp and to be the best first baseman on this roster that doesn't have any first baseman. Brett Baty is 6'3". Jorge Polanco, I believe, is 5'11". Now you can have, or he's 6 foot, but you can have a shorter first baseman, but I do like a bigger target over there. And Baty is a corner infielder. I think he'd pick it up. We also saw his ability to play on the right side of the infield. Baty was much better at second base last year than Jorge Polanco was, even though Jorge Polanco was a former shortstop. So I do think defensively, the best bet for the New York Mets, quite simply, is Brett Baty is your starting first baseman, Jorge Polanco is your DH, and that makes Mark Vientos the odd man out. But what if Mark Vientos doesn't have a lot of trade value right now? As I mentioned, Mark Vientos has had the best season of a Mets third baseman since David Wright. Now, that was largely due to the bat. I don't think he should be a third baseman, but there is still a lot of promise in Mark Vientos' bat to be your DH. So if you decide that you want to keep Vientos, now are you right back in the same position where Brett Baty and Mark Vientos are in a timeshare? Baty might play the field, Vientos might not, but in effect, it could still be a platoon where Vientos only sees left-handed pitching as the DH, and that's when Polanco goes out and plays him first. It's an option, but not a great one for Mark Vientos, and honestly, not a great one for Brett Baty. I like to see him get some matchups against left-handed pitching. I like to see those two guys not fighting for playing time for another season because I think it limits both of them. So how do you play all of them? Does Brett Baty play left field? He has played some, 30 games in his professional career, only one in the big leagues, and only for one inning in an extra inning game in May of 2023. So not accomplished out there, not well-versed at being an outfielder. But he has done it. He's athletic, and it reminds me a lot of the 2018 offseason leading to 2019, where the Mets had a guy who had just experienced a breakout in the second half in his rookie season, and that was Jeff McNeil. And Bernie Van Wagenen did everything he could to prevent Jeff McNeil from getting playing time. But once the season started, it didn't matter. The best players play, and Jeff McNeil found his way on the field. I want to talk about if Brett Baty can be the next Jeff McNeil in that regard. So we're going to go through that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Where every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel is offering users a profit boost pack that's just waiting for you inside the app. Each game day, you'll see the pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets you like most. You open up the profit boost pack first thing on game day, you see what boost you want to apply, and these boosts will let you lean into your own game day instincts. Whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, coaching, whatever it is, the boost will give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you into betting something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then you apply those profit boosts to get an even bigger payout while the NFL playoffs get rolling along. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. Now, to me, this situation with Brett Baty really does mirror what we saw with Jeff McNeil in some ways back in the offseason going into 2019, where Brodie Van Wagenen went out and he traded for Robinson Cano, and then he made a horrible signing of Jed Lowry. It was an offseason where the Mets added a lot of players, and Jeff McNeil didn't seem to be considered much. In fact, he was almost traded for Robinson Cano again. So it was a disregarding of a young player that fans really liked and thought could be a big contributor in the upcoming season. And going to spring training, it was, all right, I guess Jeff McNeil is going to try some outfield, but how confident were any of us that he was going to be able to go out there and field a position when he really wasn't an outfielder in the minor leagues? He was a second baseman. Well, McNeil adjusted to the outfield very well, and that became his role for the remainder of his Mets career, always bouncing around to whatever position the Mets needed him most. Obviously, second base was largely where he played, but he got plenty of time in left. He got time in right in this past season. He even played center field. So having that versatility is something that can get you onto the diamond when there's other players that need playing time as well. And while Brett Baty seemed to be moving away from the utility aspect of his role in the team, as he was supposed to be their starting third baseman, now you can lean right back into it. And that's how you can still play, because just like Jeff McNeil was not the 10th best player on the 2019 Mets, and he ended up getting in and playing 133 games that year, Brett Baty is not the 10th best player on this current Mets team. So Baty's going to play if he's here. It's just a matter of where is he going to play. And that's why it's going to be a pretty interesting spring training for him. And honestly, that starts right now. Brett Baty should show up to Port St. Lucie on Monday, tomorrow, and Kai Correa should be meeting him there with the fungo bat, and they should get to work because he has to learn multiple positions this spring training. He already learned second base. He still needs to get time there because Marcus Semien is, 35 years old? And I know Marcus Semien's greatest asset typically has been his ability to play every day. That is one of the things that Semien has really gone out of his way to pride himself on, right? Which you love and respect for a ball player to want to go into a season and play 162. He hit 162 games played in 2019, hit it again in 2021, was a game shy in 2022, was right back to 162 games in 2023 when the Rangers won the World Series. He then played 159 games in 2024 before last season only playing 127 games because he had that injury at the end of the season. And it was, I think, fouling a ball off of his foot or something like that. Regardless, Marcus Semien has not had the best numbers offensively the last couple of years. What if the Mets can get more out of Semien if instead of playing him every day, they are a little more selective with his matchups, and maybe he plays 135 games this season instead of 160? And you have removed him from the lineup selectively against pitchers that are going to eat him up. And in those matchups, you put Brett Baty at second base. Oh, now we just cleared maybe 25 games of playing time for Brett Baty over at second. Well, is he going to play some third still? Is that a possibility? You're not going to late game defensive swap Bo Bichette much. He's a star player. You hope as a former shortstop he can handle third base, and I am very curious to see what that looks like. And I think there's a chance that he's going to be a lot better at third than some people are giving him credit for right now. But Bo Bichette has not been a model of consistency as far as his durability the last couple of years. Not an injury-prone player. He had an injury-plagued season in 2024, but even last year, there was an injury. Remember, Bo Bichette did not show up on that playoff run until the World Series, where he miraculously came back and gave the Blue Jays a lot in that World Series, hitting 348 on a bum knee with that massive home run that would have potentially made him a World Series MVP a couple months back. But there was an injury. And you look at the games he has played the last couple of years, he has played last season 139 games in the regular season. Again, 81 games played in 2024, an injury-plagued year. 135 games played in 2023. He's not a guaranteed 160-game player, so there might be a month stretch where Bo Bichette goes down. And wouldn't it be nice if Mark Vientos was not playing third base again when that happened, or Ronnie Mauricio became the one option you had, or Luis Angel Acuna where you weren't getting much for the bat? Wouldn't it be nice if when Bichette went down, if he went down, Brett Baty could be the answer? I think that would be great. Is that a guarantee? 30 games for Baty or 20 games? Not necessarily, but again, it's a good insurance policy to have. And then you have first base, where again, Brett Baty might be the best defensive option, and he could certainly become the starting first baseman for the New York Mets with Polanco getting some time there. And when you need Baty at second, you move him over. When you need him at third, you move him there. There's also left field, where the Mets have no one right now. The current projected lineup for the Mets is Tyrone Taylor in center and Carson Bench in left, but I do not think the Mets really want Carson Bench in left and Tyrone Taylor in center, both starting. I think they want Tyrone Taylor on the bench, Carson Bench in center, or if Carson Bench needs more seasoning, then fine, they'll have to be in AAA, but the hope is to get Carson Bench up. If the Mets don't make another addition, I think that Carson Bench is your center fielder and left field's wide open. It'll be easier to address left field through free agency because center field is just Harrison Bader at this point. Cody Bellinger's not going to be a primary center fielder, and I don't think the Mets are going to sign Cody Bellinger. So when you look at the free agent market, if you're not getting Bellinger, now it drops off to what? Austin Hayes, Michael Conforto. Who else is on the market still? Max Kepler was one of the best free agents, theoretically, but he got popped for steroids, so he's out. Austin Hayes still might be the best fit. And I think you could pick up Austin Hayes as your starting left fielder, knowing that you got Brett Baty to potentially push him for playing time, where that could become its own platoon out in left field. You want to keep Mark Vientos' bat in the lineup because he's swinging it well in spring training, and that carries over into the season. Vientos is your DH. Polanco is your first baseman. Brett Baty might be your left fielder, depending on how things shake out through spring training and early on in the season. There are so many ways that you can utilize Brett Baty, and the other aspect of it is, what happens when Bo Bichette opts out of that contract? Because if things work out the way the Mets want it to, this is a one-year deal. That's not to say they wouldn't want Bo Bichette and the team in 2027, but they want Bo Bichette to put together the best season of his career. They want Bo Bichette to learn third base, be great there defensively, have an awesome offensive season, be a 5-win player, and hit the market as the best free agent available. That's what everybody wants to happen in this situation because that means the signing worked. Well, at that point, sure, maybe the Mets fall in love with Bo Bichette, and maybe next offseason they sign Bo Bichette to an 8-year deal. Who knows? Doesn't seem like the Mets' MO, but maybe that happens. Well, in that instance, you get that far down the line, and now Bichette's your third baseman. Maybe a year from now, you decide to trade Brett Baty, or maybe Brett Baty was so good in left field, he's just your left fielder, or maybe he's your first baseman. The thing is, there's so much unknown right now that you're not just trading Brett Baty because someone is playing his position. If you're going to trade Brett Baty, it's because he is the piece that another team wants that is going to get you a frontline pitcher or a starting outfielder. That's it. Because otherwise, there are ways for Brett Baty to be utilized. And to be honest, there are still ways for Brett Baty and Mark Vientos to be utilized on this roster, even with all the additions that have been made, even with a supposed logjam in the infield, you can still make it all work. You really can. Because now all of a sudden, one of Brett Baty and Mark Vientos is on your bench, giving you that bench bat that we've been talking about. All of a sudden, sure, Acuna has to be on the roster, but he can be a defensive replacement. If he proves that he can play center field, you can just cut Tyrone Taylor. If Luisito Acuna ends up being in spring training, and I'm sure they're going to get a long, hard look at him out there because he's not going to play too much second base with Semien in the fold, especially with Baty now not having third base to go to. Anytime Semien's not out there, it would be Baty. If Semien went down, it would be Baty. So I think Acuna is going to be a center fielder in spring. And if he proves he can do that, again, that's another way that you can clear up a roster spot if you ever needed to. You just make Acuna the utility guy that's the fourth outfielder, and you say goodbye to Tyrone Taylor potentially. But you can keep both of those guys on your bench. You still have Baty or Vientos there with Torrens. That's a really good bench. With, again, potentially Austin Hayes in left, which theoretically could ultimately be a platoon where Hayes is the right-handed bat on your bench. And Vientos might be your DH, and Baty could be your left fielder. There's just so many ways that Baty can be utilized that the more that I think about it, I am not at all in a rush to trade him, especially when Bo Bichette could opt out and the Mets might know, all right, well, Carson Bench is a stud and he's our starting center fielder, or Carson Bench is a stud and he's going to be our left fielder moving forward because Jet Williams or AJ Ewing has now earned the center field job. And so your outfield set with Ewing or Jet with Bench and Soto, that's locked up. Polanco, that signing went well. He's able to play first for you. Great. Maybe Vientos is your DH. Everything worked. And guess what? Brett Baty can go right back to third base in 2027. And you still have 3 more years of cheap team control unless Baty has an all-star season and makes good money in arbitration. But more likely than not, he's not going to be very expensive, and he's a piece that really can still help you for the next 4 years. I'm just not trading him for anybody, but there are still a few players I would trade him for, and that's what we're going to talk about in the final segment, how Brett Baty's presence on the trade market could end up becoming a blockbuster deal where the Mets pull in a new ace or maybe even a new outfielder. We'll go through those options to close out the show here in just a minute. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level and go ad-free. Listen to Locked On Mets with no interruptions. You can also get access to our Discord where you can communicate with other Locked On Mets fans and get access to a merch shop. So if you want to be part of our Everyday Club, you can find a link in the episode description, or you can go to lockedonmets.supercast.com. All right, so trades. Does it make sense to trade Brett Baty? I've already laid out the case of why I would not be quick to trade Brett Baty, and why I think the best case scenario for Baty at this point is either being a super utility player or if he finds a home at first base or left field. That's where I would ultimately go with Baty, but Brett Baty has way more trade value right now than Mark Vientos, because Mark Vientos has not proven he could play a position in the big leagues. And while the bat probably has a higher ceiling with Vientos, not a lot of teams are anxious to pick up a DH. It's a tough spot for Vientos, especially off the season he had. If you try to trade him after 2024, different conversation. It's not to say that Vientos can't be traded or won't be traded, because I can still see a scenario where you end up moving him. I can absolutely see that. The White Sox, not as much of a fit for Mark Vientos as they once were, because they just picked up Munetaka Murakami. So I don't even know where they'd play Vientos. I guess theoretically DH, but they also have 2 good catchers. So they got too many guys to try to cycle through that DH spot. Maybe there's a trade out there for Vientos. I don't know. But you're trading low on Mark Vientos. You would be selling high on Brett Baty because of the helium that he has coming out of last season, the way the Mets have been talking him up all offseason, and the fact that he can be an above-average defensive third baseman with 20 home run pop. That's a lot of upside for teams to buy into, and he's already gone through the growing pains of an early big league career, where now I think teams will look at Brett Baty and say, all right, he's on the other side of that. He could be our starting third baseman tomorrow. And there are teams that need a starting third baseman that are trying to contend, which leads me to the 2 main trades that we're looking at. The same ones we've been talking about on this show all off season. And really, even before that, because I was talking about trading for Jarren Duran early in the season last year. And I've been talking about the Mets trading for Freddie Peralta for literally like 4 years now. So maybe not 4, 3 years now. So now, as we look at those options, to me, that's where you trade Brett Baty. If the Milwaukee Brewers, who have a lot of interest in Freddie Peralta right now, he's going to get traded because so many teams want him. So only making $8 million so he can fit any team's payroll. The Yankees are in, the Mets are in. You don't want to hear this, but the Dodgers are in, and the Brewers want young starting pitching. The Dodgers can offer them 2 arms that can start in their rotation tomorrow, which makes them a really dangerous team. But do the Brewers really want to arm their competition in the National League? I know that the Mets are also in the National League, but it's a little bit different with the Dodgers. Do they really want Freddie Peralta to be the reason that they go up against the Dodgers in the NLCS and Peralta's on the mound for Game 7 beats them? Part of me thinks not. Granted, you could say the same thing about the Mets, but I don't think that the Brewers are as concerned about what Peralta would mean for the Mets. So that is still, to me, right now, the top target of this offseason at this stage for the New York Mets. Get your hands on Freddie Peralta because you don't have to commit 5 years to him like you might with Framber. It's a 1-year deal. If you wanted to, you could extend him off of the 1 year of control that you have and probably get a better deal done now than you get done a year from now. But if Freddie wants to go into free agency, which in a class that doesn't have a lot of good position players, maybe it's not the worst thing to be number 2 in the Tarek Skubal free agent class. He might end up getting a ton for whoever finishes second for Skubal. Maybe he wants to go into the market. Maybe the Mets are okay just riding out the 1 year and tagging him with the QO, and you see what happens next year. And maybe the Mets go all in on Skubal in free agency. So renting Peralta to buy Skubal is something I've talked about on this show a lot. I also love the idea of, again, trading for Peralta and extending him. But either way, Brett Baty is the perfect fit for the Milwaukee Brewers right now. The perfect fit. He could be their starting third baseman. Caleb Durbin could bounce back and forth between third and first, really all over the diamond. He could play some second base too. That's a great option. I think they might want Brett Baty over, say, AJ Ewing or Jet Williams or one of these top 100 prospects. And the Mets would then get to keep a top 100 position player prospect. They're losing a guy that I think could be great for them this season. But if it gets you your ace, you have to consider pulling the trigger. Now, I've talked myself into the super utility role for Brett Baty so much that I'd prefer that you throw another prospect in the deal. I'd rather give up. I wouldn't give up Tong or Christian Scott, your current depth. But if you dip a little bit further, if they really want 2 arms and you had to trade Sproat and Wenninger, that's a lot to give up. But I would trust the Mets' ability to generate more pitching talent that maybe I would do it just because of the need for Freddie Peralta atop this Mets rotation. There's other ways to get Peralta, but if that's the sticking point, if now that Brett Baty is available, theoretically, the Brewers say, okay, Dave, we love you, buddy, but we want Baty. So Baty, Sproat, we got a deal done right now. And you have 6 or 7 teams that might be bidding on Peralta services. If the Brewers are in love with Brett Baty, you trade Brett Baty and you thank him for an awesome season in 25 that allowed him to have the trade value to move him. And you figure out third base later because even if Bichette walks, you got Jacob Reimer, who's a top 100 prospect that's already in AA. You have Jet Williams, who is a shortstop, theoretically can go play third. You have options. You have Ronnie Mauricio. So while I would really prefer to keep Baty, if it gets you Peralta and then this team is looking set in that rotation and they got a really good lineup, I can buy in. The other guy is Jarren Duran. The Red Sox have a vacancy in their infield left by Alex Bregman at third base. Marcelo Meyer is the projected third baseman, but that leaves Romy Gonzalez at second base or bringing the best defensive center fielder in baseball back into the infield to play second in Ceddanne Rafaela, and that's just stupid. So I think as someone who loves baseball and loves defense and loves outfield defense in particular, don't rob us all watching Ceddanne Rafaela play center because you couldn't figure out a trade for one of your outfielders. The Red Sox should trade Jarren Duran, but it's not an easy trade to make. And I think they'd probably prefer to get a better bat in their lineup than Brett Baty. Not a knock on Baty, but this is a team that just lost Bregman that would then be losing Duran. And all of a sudden, you don't have a lot of established hitters. If they could find a way to trade Jarren Duran and one of their pitching prospects for Ketel Marte, something they've maybe already tried to iron out throughout the offseason, who knows? That's the home run for the Red Sox. But if they get to a point where they're not finding that trade, at the Mets put a package on the table that's Brett Baty and Jet Williams as a start. They'd be getting their starting third baseman. They'd be getting a guy in Jet Williams that could compete for infield reps, could also go out and play the outfield. He could be a utility man for them. He's a top 100 prospect that would slide right into their system in AAA. That's a pretty good deal for Jarren Duran, who has 3 years left to control. And maybe they need to put some more on top of that. Maybe the Mets have to add in a third or a fourth piece, but I don't think you have to give up another top 100 prospect in that trade. I don't think you have to give up another MLB piece. At least not. I don't know if you have to trade Vientos and Baty and Jet, right? I think maybe if they loved Acuna for some reason, sure, throw Acuna in the deal. If they love Ronnie Mauricio, I wouldn't let that hold me up on getting Jarren Duran, because Jarren Duran would make this Mets lineup 1 through 9 pretty stacked. All of a sudden, Duran's hitting that top 4 with Soto, Lindor, and Bichette. Probably not in that order, but you'd figure it out. You have Jarren Duran that can plug in a center field, ease Carson Bench into the big leagues and left. Now this team really makes sense. So while, again, it would suck to trade Brett Baty, you're getting 3 years of Duran for 4 years of Baty. And yes, you have to give a top 100 prospect in Jet Williams, and that's full control of him. But you do it to get an all-star caliber outfielder into your lineup. The other trades I don't really like. I really think I'd only trade Brett Baty for either Freddie Peralta or Jarren Duran. But at Just Baseball, we had a show. We do this series called Playing GM on the Just Baseball show. And they were doing the Royals the other day. And they threw out a potential package, which I hated, but I'll mention it. It was Brett Baty for Kris Bubic straight up. Bubic has 1 year of control. I don't think I would be in on that because he only has 1 year of control, but he was a really good pitcher last year, and he does have some frontline upside if he pitches the way that he did last year over a full season, but he got hurt down the stretch with a rotator cuff. Guy that already had Tommy John. I just don't love a guy that has had an elbow injury and then not too distant past. He has a shoulder injury that limited him to 20 starts last year. Yes, he pitched to a 2.55 ERA. He had a 2.89 FIP. He's really good, but I wouldn't do that one. Another one I came up with, which again, I don't really love, but I was adding a couple more trades to the article that I wrote here. I threw in a different trade where it was Brett Baty for Luis Castillo straight up. Now, this one I like more than Bubic because it's 2 years of control and it's a dependable innings eater. I just am wondering, when does Luis Castillo show his age? He just turned 33 a month ago. I think he could still have 2 good years left. And last year he pitched to a 3.54 ERA in 180 and 2/3 innings. Granted, he pitches in a very pitcher-friendly ballpark, but it's not like the Mets have Great American Small Park, which, funny enough, is where Luis Castillo started his career. I'd be interested in that one if you struck out on the pitching market and you couldn't find anything else. Luis Castillo is a really good pitcher. He has been for a long time. You look at the inning count on Castillo going back to 2018. He was out away from 170 innings. He then went to 190 and 2/3 in 2019. Didn't miss a start in 2020, which is obviously the shortened season. 187 and 2/3 in 2021. Missed a little bit of time and still made 25 starts in 2022. There he got traded. It was over 150 innings. Then first full year in Seattle, 197 innings. Second year in Seattle, 175 and a third innings. And again, last year, 180 and 2/3. So the fact that you could almost pencil in 350 innings over the next 2 years if you trade for Luis Castillo, I could get my head around that one. Although I'd prefer for the Mets to stay internal with their rotation, I think, almost, and keep Baty as util. And also I talked to somebody who covers the Mariners, and he doesn't think they're going to trade from their rotation. So take that one with a grain of salt. Ultimately, I think where I am at after diving into this on the article and talking it out on the podcast, Brett Baty should be the Mets super utility guy this upcoming season. And you find at-bats for him wherever you can. I think he's going to be your best defensive first baseman. I think that he has a chance to hold his own in left. When he was a prospect and he was playing some left field, again, it was very small sample size, but he looked a lot better out there than Ronnie Mauricio did, which you might think is a little bit backwards. I think people have sort of an inflated view of Mauricio's athleticism as a former shortstop, but Baty just has better reaction out there in particular. He's just a good ball player. So I'd keep him. I really would. But if Brett Baty was the sticking point in trade negotiations that would stop you from getting Freddie Peralta or Jarren Duran, I'm not letting that get in the way. I would put them on the table for those two pieces because both of them fit this roster so perfectly. I don't think it's going to happen, but if the Mets found a way to land Duran and Peralta in trades to close out this offseason, that's the best team in baseball not named the Dodgers. I honestly believe that to be the case. Your 1 through 9 year lineup would be ridiculous. Your rotation with Peralta and McLean at the top, with the upside that is still present with Jonah Tong in the system, with Christian Scott coming off the injury, and with the bounce back potential of Manaea, of Senga, of Peterson after the second half that he had, and trusting that Clay Holmes is going to be a good middle of the rotation arm. I love this Mets team. If they get Freddie Peralta for that rotation, or if they get Duran in the outfield, if they do both, watch out. So we'll see. It's another chip that the Mets have to use in multiple ways, whether it's trading him, whether it's utilizing him as a super utility player. Brett Baty will have a large impact on the upcoming season, either on the field from his own play or from what he fetches back on the market. I hope it's the former. I hope he stays with the Mets. But I think if they trade him, they got somebody really, really good. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.